Neutral atoms have the same numbers of protons as electrons, so they have zero overall charge. Ions, on the other hand, have different numbers of electrons compared to protons. To calculate the overall charge, you would take the number of protons and subtract the number of electrons. Another way of thinking about it is you are adding up all the charges in the atom, all of the positive charges from the protons, and then you are adding some negative numbers due to the negative charge of the electrons. To find the overall charge of a sodium ion, we would take its 11 protons and subtract its 10 electrons to get an overall +1 charge. What is the overall charge of an atom containing 34 protons, 36 electrons, and 46 neutrons? Is it A, +34, B, +2, C, -10, or D, -2? To find the overall charge, we can take the number of protons and subtract the number of electrons. So we have 34 minus 36, that's protons minus electrons, and that gives us a -2 overall charge, which is D. You could also think of it as adding up the total charge. Our total charge from protons is a +34, and our total charge from electrons is a -36. So +34 minus 36 gives us -2 overall. Notice that we didn't use the number of neutrons at all because they don't affect the overall charge since they don't have any charge themselves. We divide ions into two categories depending on whether they are positively or negatively charged. Cations have a net positive charge because they have more protons than electrons. The number of protons cannot change except through nuclear chemistry, which we do not cover in this class. Only the electrons can change. So in order for an atom to become positively charged, it must lose negatively charged electrons. This may be a little different from how you are used to thinking, so take a minute to let it sink in. Negatively charged electrons must be lost in order for the charge of the atom to become more positive. There are a couple ways to remember the term cation. You could think of the cat picture on this slide with plus signs for its eyes. Cats generally make us happy, so they are good, so cations are positive. You could also think of the T in cation as being a plus sign. Anions, on the other hand, have a net negative charge because they have more electrons than protons. They again are not changing their number of protons, but the number of electrons has changed. They have gained negatively charged electrons to turn into negatively charged ions. You can think of the term anion as sounding like onion. Onions make you cry when you cut them, so they are bad, so anions are negative. You could also think of the first N in anion as standing for negative. We have already mentioned that neutral atoms have the same number of protons as electrons. If we know the charge of an ion, we can figure out how many electrons it contains. First, we would need to figure out how many electrons would be in the corresponding neutral atom. For example, if we know it is a nitrogen ion, we would look up nitrogen on the periodic table and find that it is element number 7, so it has 7 protons, and therefore a neutral nitrogen atom would also have 7 electrons. Our second step would be taking away electrons for each positive charge or adding electrons for each negative charge. For example, in the nitrogen 3- ion, we would add 3 electrons. Again, this is counterintuitive, but it is because electrons are negatively charged. You might find it helpful to think of anions as adding electrons. Both anion and add start with A. Notice we usually write the magnitude and then the sign of the charge. So we often write nitrogen 3- instead of nitrogen -3, but they mean the same thing. How many total electrons are in the chromium 3+ ion? Is it A, 3, B, 21, C, 24, or D, 27? To answer this question, first we need to know how many electrons there are in the neutral chromium atom. So we look on the periodic table and we see that chromium is element number 24, which means that it has 24 protons, and therefore in the neutral chromium atom, it would also have 24 electrons. So it has 24 in the neutral chromium atom. Then we're going to subtract 3 electrons because we have a +3 charge on the ion. In order for it to become positively charged, it needs to lose negatively charged electrons. So we're going to subtract 3, not add 3. I know it's confusing because there's a plus symbol here, but that's not telling you to add 3. It's telling you that the charge has an overall +3. So we've got 24 minus 3. It's lost 3 electrons, and that gives us 21 electrons in the ion, which is B.